Hello everybody, welcome to Crafty Soup. My name is Misty. Today I have for you the forgery on the 4th project over at the CKC group, and this is our inspiration kit papers for this month, and I am going to forge that scallop print. I have my sheet of plain white cardstock, and I'm going to be stamping on this, and I'm going to be sure to use the smooth side of this textured cardstock because the stamping will turn out better that way. And I have this really old stamp set that has a scallop stamp in it. If you're not used to working with these longer clear stamps, then a good tip is to kind of toss it down on your table and then pick it up, because if you try to just apply it straight to your stamping block, you can end up with getting curves. So I tossed it on my table and picked it up with my my block there. So the paper that we're mimicking here today had like a stitched border, and then underneath that was the scalloped edges. So I'm just going to hand draw a stitched edge on here, and I'm not taking any care to really measure the stitching part, although I am spacing out each row of stitching to get an even look overall. So I've got this ruler, and I'm kind of lining up my previous stitching halfway down that ruler edge, and then continuing on with all of my stitching. Now, if you don't have a scallop stamp, stick with me because I will show you a couple of ways to get this look if you don't have any kind of scallop stamp set already. So I do go through a process of choosing my colors here based on the rest of my kit, and if you haven't seen my kit build, I will leave a link for you, as well as info on the Counterfeit Kit group if you're new here and you don't know what that is. So I got my colors picked out, and I am going to save myself some time by doing all the blue first and then moving on to all the yellow and so forth. So I marked on my paper which rows were going to be blue, and since I have 4 colors, every 4th row is going to be blue. Now my stamp set didn't reach all the way across my paper, and certainly not one, but I think it took like 3.5 stamps to get all the way across, something like that. So what I figured out later on in the process is that if I stamped the first 3 solid rows there, and then I saved that half row to the end, that kind of saved time. So here I am, I just did my yellows, and I've moved on to my reds, and finally I'm moving on to my greens, and this is the point of the process when I realized that that time-saving tip of just stamping these first 3 groups there and then saving that last bit for the end. So that completes the paper here. So let's go ahead and move on to some other ideas. If you don't have that scallop stamp set, you could repeat this with cardstock borders, and if you have a scallop punch, you could punch out pieces of cardstock and glue them down in strips to your pattern paper. Or you could attempt making your own stamp. Now I have a little scrap of craft foam here from other projects, and I'm going to put this into my circle punch, and now this isn't perfect. The punches aren't meant to punch through craft foam. If you put a sheet of just printer paper on there, that can help get a smoother punch. But what I did was just trim off the edges of these little foam bits. And if you don't have craft foam, you could use like a meat packaging foam. Just wash it really well before you use it for crafting. Or you could even layer up blocks of cardstock and get a similar effect, although it won't be quite as smooth as the foam. So once you have those circles punched out of whatever material you're going to use, cut them in half, so now that they're half circles, and then on a stamping block you can apply some adhesive. I recommend removable adhesive because it'll be a little bit easier to clean up later, but cleaning up adhesive off of a stamp block is definitely a trick, and so stick around and I'll show you how to do that. So I just put my adhesive down on my stamp block, and I made sure that my stamp block was long enough to fit all my pieces before I put the adhesive on there. Sometimes I do think ahead. Okay, so once I've got those attached on there, I now have myself a homemade stamp. And I'm going to go ahead and ink up this stamp here. And taking a little while to get all that ink in there because the foam will absorb quite a bit the very first time you use it. The second time that you ink it up for stamping, you won't need quite as much ink. So there's the first stamp, and you can see it does really well. And then I'm going to go ahead and ink it up again, and you'll see this second inking doesn't take quite as much. And then you can just use this like I did with my other stamp and just continue your border along. And I actually like the scale of that one better than what I started off with, so I probably would have enjoyed using that to begin with. Now, you could also create these scallop circles with a die. That actually works quite a bit better for cutting any foam type thick products than a punch will. And then the other tip is that you don't want to reuse these when you're changing colors because you can't clean that foam out. So you'll have to create new pieces for each color that you're going to use. All right, let's go ahead and talk about getting this adhesive off of here once you've created your own stamp set. Adhesive doesn't like to, even temporary adhesive, doesn't like to rub off of acrylic blocks based on my previous experiences. So I just use a tissue and a little bit of rubbing alcohol, and that should clean up your adhesive. Now, if you have more of a stringy tape runner adhesive, it might take a little more effort to get that off. And the other nice thing about the alcohol is that it will clean any smudgies and smears of ink off your stamp block, so they will be sparkling and clean by the time you're done with this process. I hope you got some tips and tricks out of this small, quick project today, either ways to use short border stamps to make a larger pattern, ways to create your own stamps out of everyday materials, and ways to create products that you enjoy but don't already own. So if you got anything helpful out of this video, I do appreciate you giving it a like because that does help my channel. So thanks for joining me, and I will be back on Friday with another video for you. I'll see you then.